So, let's pretend it's the 15th century. Guess what? Everything sucks. The plague is still kicking around, but it's not taking people out in droves anymore. Crops are frequently failing, and you're never quite sure when or where you're going to get your next meal. However, the mortality rate is pretty high, which means there are some openings up among elite society. No worries, though. The bureaucrats will be snatching those posts up, no problems. As the nobility shifts, so does its very definition. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter how rich you are or who your daddy was. It's all about how virtuous you happen to be and how well you've been educated. Neither the wealth of Croesus nor the antiquity of the blood of Priam could rival reason as an ingredient of nobility. Or so they say. Of course, this only counts if you're to the west of the Danube. Around this time, there's a cultural fault line growing between that side and the east, where the reduced population is being handled in a different manner. Basically, if you're on the East Coast and you're a peasant, your rights are being squashed. Hard. That change in nobility, it doesn't apply. They're doing their best to keep you exactly where you are. But you know what? That's okay. All of that is fine, because you, my fine friend, live in the 15th century. And do you know what the 15th century is famous for? The Renaissance! Okay, so, technically, a renaissance is when a country attempts to revive an old way of living, and this apparently happens several times in any given millennia. In fact, the term itself is French for rebirth. However, this time is the big one, the one that most people think of when they refer to a renaissance, when Europe decided to look back and remodel itself with ancient Greece and Rome as its cornerstones. Funny thing about the Renaissance, while it's famous for its artistic works depicting things like the Bible and naked women, the concept of art for art's sake wasn't anywhere to be found. When an artist looked for patrons, he had to be good at everything. Party planning, painting, design. Apparently, even Da Vinci paid his bills by designing and constructing weapons. Actually, the most distinctive part of the century was the style of learning. The church was losing power, what with its inability to pick a pope, so there wasn't anyone to breathe down the nobility's neck when they went for more secular programs, like history, grammar, and perhaps most noticeably, moral philosophy. The most prestigious and accepted form of philosophy was humanism, where the studies were approached with human concerns and values in mind. It was this mode of thinking that began to change not only the scholarly manners, but the way people viewed the wider world and even their own religions. Churches became more accessible, allowing the man outside the clergy to participate in rites and ceremonies. Nonetheless, spells and superstition were still amok in Florence. However, modern science began to grow out of their attempts at sorcery and conjuring. Chemistry can even trace its roots back to alchemy. Humanism began to breed other forms of lifestyle, that of chivalry, which boasted 3 pillars of honor, courtly love, and knightly virtues. Courage, justice, mercy, charity, faith, nobility, hope, diligence, chastity, humility, and resolve, although the list was subject to change. Explorers of the time attempted to embody these pillars, making themselves up to be romantic, chivalric heroes. While the exploration would prove to be fruitful in the long run, it seems only Europe had any interest in doing it. Empires like India and China, which were already stable in their power and location. Why go to the people when they will come to us? Trade passed through these countries often, and they were wealthy because of it. Only off-centered Europe had the need and the drive to send its countrymen off in droves to seek resources and adventure. People at the time liked to view themselves as self-governed, after all. Rome was a republic. But eventually the power slid sideways into the hand of the Medici family, who were stationed in Florence. They were never officially monarchs, and in case you were wondering, they got all that power by running the biggest bank in Europe. It was around that time that nationalism began to flourish. That is, people who looked alike and spoke alike began to glom together, firm in the belief that they were superior to those who looked and spoke differently. There were, however, a few areas that opted against becoming empires. Mamluk in Egypt, for example, was rich and productive, but fenced in by the desert. It couldn't expand if it wanted to, and several other states along Africa's Mediterranean stayed afloat through trade and piracy instead of expansion. In short, 15th century Europe was a bottle of interesting times. Things are changing, and we still feel the echoes of some of those changes today.